Hi, everybody. I'm John Self. Good morning and welcome to Lunch and Learn. We're back on video today as we continue to test a new graphics package. Unfortunately, StreamYard does not allow us to go live with Keynote and its graphics animations. And so we're trying to discover how we can adapt this to our live coaching sessions. Now, although this was taped earlier this morning, I will be around watching the chat section. So if you have questions about some of the things we're talking about today, which will be, I think, of pretty important interest to you about storytelling in your job interview, if you'll put your questions in the chat box, I will monitor things. And then at the end of the stream, we will come back on live if there are any questions and spend time with you answering those. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know at john@johngself.com. And we look forward to sharing with you some new offerings in the near future. Thanks again. And hey, don't forget to join us tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock for office hours. We have a great program planned again. Thanks so much and enjoy the stream. Make no mistake, storytelling is one of the most incredibly powerful things for leaders and for job interviewers, people managing their careers. Interviewers hire based on trust and likability. Stories help you make that connection with the interviewers and the hiring managers. I think once you understand the interview structure and the tools that you can use, you'll be able to really boost your interviewing skills, really help yourself differentiate you from your formidable competitors. This is interviewing and career management job search. It's a zero-sum game contest. There are winners and losers. We're committed to help you become a winner. Today, our agenda, we're going to begin with focusing on just the basics, the interview structure. That includes the traditional Q&A interview and the more popular behavior and values interviews. Tell me about a time or this or that. Then the second thing we'll do is talk about the tools. But today, we're going to focus solely on storytelling. I've had a lot of people say, John, you talk about storytelling all the time. What does that mean? How do we use it? And you know what? A lot of people won't ask that question. So we're going to give you the answer today. Then we're going to outline the storytelling process. How do you decide which stories to use? Do you decide when you're in the interview or do you prepare in advance? Basically, to really be effective, you have to understand your value. Secondly, you have to curate your stories. You select stories in advance that match up with your values. Then we're going to talk about delivery, how and when. That is so important because that can enhance the impact and boost the emotional connections. Hiring managers and even experienced recruiters, I certainly found this to be true, struggle to remember the details of an interview. When I was an executive global recruiter, I would interview sometimes 4 or 5 people a day. Typically 3. It would be 8 or 9 hours of interviewing people. And at the end of the day, everybody's face, you take detail notes, we videotape part of it, but they still all sort of run together in your mind. You don't always remember facts and figures, the before and after comparisons, but when they're wrapped in a story, people remember stories. Recruiters, hiring managers remember stories. So the key thing for you to remember is in order to break through all of this intense competition at the executive and management level, you have to be a helpful candidate. You need to be a memorable candidate. So wrap your facts and figures in a compelling narrative. I think that the important thing I can do is to assure you anyone can do this if you're willing to put in the work. And that's really the key thing. Job searching, and you'll hear this theme over and over. It's not a tough construct. It's simple, but it's not easy. You have to put in the work. And if you put in the work, you're investing in your career. And that investment will pay handsome dividends. So, as you get started, let's talk about building a foundation. In the end, employers are going to hire the qualified people they like and trust, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. And storytelling is that tool to foster likability and to build trust. Now, This is an important underlying observation. What top recruiters are listening and watching for in job interviews? First of all, is the candidate prepared? Preparation. Is the applicant knowledgeable about the elements of the job, or are the questions they are asking readily available in the information we've already provided them? Did they do their homework? Do they understand the context of the issues we've raised in this job summary or in the position prospectus? The retained recruiters tend to provide a lot more detail. Is the applicant self-aware? People that are self-aware are usually the ones that are confident because they've prepared, they've done their homework, they've rehearsed, they know what stories they'd like to use, and because they know they're prepared, their brain's not running trying to retrieve information at such a high rate, and they're able to make eye contact, to remember those physical things, the atmospherics, the performance implications. Now, does the applicant demonstrate an imagination? When you're telling your story and when you're explaining your performance, were you a little bit creative? That's also important. Leaders need an imagination. Leaders need to be creative. Now, one of the most common questions that people do not ask about storytelling is, how in the heck do you do it? This is not once upon a time stories. These are stories based on your strengths, your accomplishments. Think of them as examples that you package into a compelling narrative. And I think that's why there are so few applicants who are good storytellers. And so if you have the desire to become a good storyteller and you put in the work, you are opening a fantastic market niche for yourself. Why? Because so many people don't tell stories, they answer questions. But if you are able to mix in stories in a compelling narrative, you will become memorable. And that's really important for you to consider. And I think this is why there's so few good job applicants who are good storytellers. They don't ask. They don't really want to admit they don't know. And, that's why a lot of them just show up. They read the prospectus. That's their idea of doing homework. That's just terrible. You can't do that. We are in the midst of a probably prolonged white-collar recession where there are always going to be dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of people applying for the same job at the management and the executive levels. And you need to differentiate yourself. You need to be able to open a door so that you are in a better position to connect with the recruiter. Now, there are two categories of stories in a job interview. One is based on an event, and the other is really tied to some operational challenge. Tell me about a time when you improved cash on hand, or tell me about a time when you improved employee loyalty or employee satisfaction or customer satisfaction. Those are operational challenges. So let's talk first about the event. It's a situation, so you want to describe the circumstances. Second, set the stage. Who, what, when, and where. That's really important. That you want to bring the interviewer into your story. Third is impact. You want to deliver it in a way that it immediately impacts the interviewer, and you want to talk about the impact also for the benefit of the company, and then certainly you want to talk about the longer term outcome, and look very carefully at career implications. So those are key elements that you want to keep in front and center as you curate your stories. The second thing we want to talk about is the challenge, the project. This is based on really a situation. Again, tell me about a time when you resolved a conflict with a doctor or a union representative who was constantly disrupting activities. The second thing is the task. Explain your specific role and responsibilities in this process. The third is action. Explain the actions you took to address the situation. And finally, the result. Explain the outcome with the before and after, emphasizing your contributions. Now, again, you don't just package this in kind of a dull, sterile narrative. You don't want to they've got to be put together in a very succinct, impactful way. You can't afford a 3 to 5 or 10 minute story droning on and on because everybody's eyes are going to glaze over. Not to be political, but if you saw some of the key people during the middle of a recent a nominating convention, after about 30 minutes, people's eyes begin to glaze over. 93 minutes is a long time to be listening to anything. And keep in mind also that some of the younger recruiters and younger talent acquisitions people are used to short videos. That's how they've learned a lot, using videos and short videos. And so they really want that approach. So as you're preparing your stories, you don't just say, I'm going to tell a story about this or that. You write the story down and you really prepare it, and so you can get the right impact. Now, there is, of course, a cautionary note to everything. First of all, for every story, it needs to have a purpose and a goal. Okay? So if you pick a story out that you particularly like, what is it going to specifically address? How are you going to use that story to connect with the interviewer? What is the very specific purpose, and what's the goal of telling that story? Does it talk about your flexibility? Does it talk about your creativity? Does it talk about your problem-solving skills? The second is you've got to create a flexible story list. You're not going to use all your stories in every interview, and you may not use, as you write these stories down in sort of a script fashion and learn them, you may not use all elements of that each story script as an explanation, because you may be interviewing with somebody who wants a short, punchier sort of answer, and will try to move it along. So you must carefully prepare each story. This is the third and very important point. Selecting key common elements to emphasize a multiple of your skills. When you understand your value, you're going to have 4 or 5 signature strengths. Your stories need to be linked back to your strengths. Now, another thing people don't like to do, but it's so important today in a competitive management and executive market. You have to rehearse. You have to rehearse and rehearse in advance, not the night before. I think one of the problems with President Biden's debate performance is that he was overcoached. He was tired. He didn't feel well, and they put in too much information. And it, he just, as an older person, wasn't able to quickly retrieve the information. Don't over prepare yourself. Don't try to cram the night before. This needs to be 2 to 3 weeks in advance, because typically that's how much notice you're going to have these days. Now, we talk about building something, and design and construction, it's a complex process that requires careful planning. Well, so does the interview process. It's a unique form of business communication and requires careful planning. So we really want you to pick up on this. Now, again, this is so important. You've got to take the time. You have to invest the time to plan carefully and pick out the right stories, and then construct them in a way that's going to benefit your signature strengths. Now, again, the answer to all these issues, how do you do it? They're all simple. This is not rocket science. But like searching for a job, it's not easy. It requires a lot of hard work, including all that rehearsal time that I mentioned a minute ago. Mastering the job interview requires much more rehearsal than you will get in. You need to be more prepared. You need to do these situational interviews more times, because you're in your career. Let me just rephrase that. You're not going to get enough experience just interviewing in a normal career interview to really become a master storyteller. You've got to put in the extra work. But let me tell you something. It will be worth it. It will pay dividends. It will differentiate you from everybody else in the marketplace, so that if all of your skills and your personality traits are compatible with the organization, if you're a good storyteller, you raise your chances of getting the job much higher. Now, let's talk about the interview structure, as I said a minute ago. Most of, early on when I got started in my career, and I don't want to go back into the old days because everybody's going to roll their eyes, but a lot of times it was just traditional questions. Where were you born? What'd your mom and dad do? How did you decide to go into journalism? What made you go into healthcare? Things like that. They just wanted facts and information. Then came behavior and values interview, and that was really popularized by Brad Smart. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, and that really transformed the job interview process. So Brad Smart wrote a book, Top Grading. It's still available. I think it's the quintessential book on behavior and values interviewing. You can get it at Amazon, and in the back of the book, it provides detailed questions that are commonly used in behavior and values interviews. It's important to understand the structure and the rationale behind these interviews. This is the consultant. This is the system that Jack Welch used. And for those of you who don't remember, Jack Welch ran GE in the 90s and the early 80s, and it was one of the most successful corporations in the world because he hired great people. As a CEO, Welch got it. He finally understood. I'm not going to be successful. GE's not going to be successful until we hire really great people and really focus on elevating the people we have and training and developing them. So let's move to the thing about tools and the secrets to improving your interview performance. First of all, whether you want to tell stories or not, if you're not doing this, you're way, way off the chart. Value brand statement. Understand your value. If somebody says, John, tell me about yourself, you have maybe 60 to 75 seconds to put together a great narrative that talks about who you are, what your values are, and how you can be of value to this company. Now, unless they say, walk me through your resume, when they say, John, tell me about yourself, they don't want to hear about your resume. They got that. They can look at that anytime they want. They've got you in the room. You're sitting in front of them or on the screen, and they want to know who you are, what you believe in, and why they should hire you. That's what that why, what tell us about yourself is all about. And you'll hear it about tell us about something that's not on your resume, tell us about, why you chose. You take that question and you have an answer pre-prepared based on your value brand statement. Now, your value brand statement is usually based on your signature, it's always based on your signature strengths that you get through a worksheet exercise. And I think that's really, really important to know what your strengths are. I'm going to show you mine in just a minute, but there's a form that we'll be happy to share with you for free that will allow you to, get really organize your thoughts and come down to a value brand statement that helps you sell yourself. Now, people say, well, what's the difference between this and an elevator statement? Well, elevator statements, the term's still used, but that is so yesterday. Elevator statements were used to be about, this is what I've been doing, and this is the experience I have. Value brand statements are more about, this is what I've accomplished. This is how I can help your company. So you also want to, in order to diagnose the summary, you really need to have a form to help you do that. And we've created a core and categorical breakdown. Now, when you're looking at the job summary, read it several times. Try to peer in between the lines if possible. Some people are really good at that, others not so much. Try to look for all the information you can get. If you think the hospital or the business may be struggling, Google them and see what you find in local press reports. Okay? But be careful how you use that information. That's more for your preparation, not for you to try to impress them that you know a lot about their company. If they sense that you're well prepared and really understand their story, that's what's really important. Now, the core and categorical form allows you to break a job down by categories. And then in each category, you assemble possible questions you might get asked on that category. You assemble your strengths on that category, your weaknesses, the things you hope they don't ask you, but also some questions you would ask yourself if you were doing the interview. And then looking at all that, you want to put together a story that if you think they're having an issue, or maybe you sense that there's turnover, you can use a story that emphasizes your ability to solve problems, to reduce turnover, to improve cash on hand, to improve market share, whatever the underlying issues are. Storytelling is the answer. Now, people, again, you can sit there and give them drone on with facts and figures, and more often than not, they're not going to really remember any of that. But boy, when you wrap them in a compelling narrative, not some rambling story, but something that you put together that is 1.5 to 2, maybe 3 minutes. Storytelling is basically giving facts, but wrapping it in a different narrative, not just droning on, but talk about how you solve the problem. And the how you pull people together. That's what people want to hear. Some of the best books in business, some of the books that are most popular in business, don't talk about all the charts and all this other stuff. They get into help the people and the struggles they had and what it took to turn around the project. So storytelling is a key deal. So let's talk about the process. First of all, you have to categorize your value brand statements, your signature strengths. Then, based on those strengths, you're going to select some stories, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, or however many you want to have. The more you have, the more work you're going to have to do, the more memorization you're going to have to do, or learning. I don't want you to sound like an artificial voice on a computer when you're telling your story. You want to curate your stories that are going to be more impactful for that particular employer. Then you want to start fine-tuning the stories. You can't make it up on the fly unless you are a world-class extemporaneous speaker, and 95% of you out there are not. Then you need to fine-tune this. This is stuff that anybody can do. This is not rocket science. So I want you to know that. I mean, we can help you if you have questions. You can always get a free consult with us on our website at Talk to John at the bottom of the webpage. But these are ways that, fine-tuning your stories, and you're fine-tuning them to be sure that the situation is relevant to the client that you're interviewing with, and that you've achieved maximum impact, and that you really enhance the emotional trigger or the emotional hook that you're going to try to plant. Now, it's very, very important. It's very important that once you fine-tune it, you practice it, and you work on your pacing, because it's not just what you're saying, but it's how you say it. Again, the impact, oh my gosh, it's in the delivery. I use this story a lot, but let me tell you briefly. Evangelist Billy Graham, whom some of you don't know, but was an extraordinarily influential religious person in the United States in the 60s and through the mid-70s. He did these big crusades for Christ, he called them, at these big amphitheaters, and he would do sermons, and he would have night after night, and all these people would come to hear him preach. He could fill up a 12, 15,000 person arena. But toward the end of his sermon of the night, he would begin to pace himself. He would begin to slow down. He would make some very dramatic points. He was trying to reach his audience, to trigger that emotion, to help them get up from their seats, even up in the rafters, and make the trek down to the altar stage down in the front part of the arena. And hundreds, if not thousands of people every night would do that. Why? Because he knew how to tell the story that he wanted to tell that night, the biblical story, and do it in a way to touch people's emotions. Now, he wasn't a slow speaker. He was a very good North Carolina evangelist. He could rock the rafters sometimes with the level of his voice. But when it came to the altar call, when he was trying to reach people and touch those buttons individually, he slowed down. He made very careful points. And that is very helpful. There is a big-time performative element in interviewing, and it's not what you say, but it's also how you say it. Okay, let's talk about signature strengths, and these are some examples. And you take these from your value brand statement. You can only have 5. 4 is better, but no more than 5, because then you're not very focused. So 5 of mine are, first, probably engaging. I'm not afraid to engage with friends and strangers. My father used to say this kid could chat up a brick wall. Now, that's a brief story right there. Verbal, it's a strength that it also can be a weakness, but I'm very quick on my feet. I'm good at extemporaneous speaking, mostly. I've had the first time I was a debater in college, and the first time I went on a debate tournament, the speech coach came up to me and said, I've signed you up. One of the persons, was supposed to be with us today. One of the competitors didn't show up, and so I've signed you up for extemporaneous speaking. My topic was life inside a ping pong ball, and I think I made the judge laugh when I said the first thing you have to learn is that it can be a very slippery existence, so you need to check your leather shoes at the door. I think I talk about putting on sneakers or training shoes. Anyway, verbal strengths. I'm pretty quick on my feet. I've made a living doing presentations to boards and hospital CEOs, implementing helicopter ambulances back in the 70s and managing rural and community hospitals in the 80s, and then doing search work in the 90s. All that required public presentations. I'm pretty creative. People say I have a good sense of humor. It's sometimes a little bent, that probably owing to my days in the newspaper business. I'm very much a self-starter, and I very much desire success. So those are my signature strengths. So let's talk about how we use those, okay? So we get the curated stories, and we start building a structure here. What can we say? What stories can we use that will address certain issues like engaging, not afraid to be with friends and strangers? How are we going to use that strength? What story can I use as an example? Verbal, a strength that can be a weakness. Sometimes people will say, "Well, tell me about your weaknesses, John." And I just say, I'm one of the things I've always done is, sometimes you have to say, well, I'm not very good at this, but I've worked very hard. So you don't want to dwell on the negative, but you don't want to say you don't have any weaknesses. I say sometimes your strength can be a great weakness. And I have to be very careful about monitoring my verbal switch. Sometimes I can talk too much. Sometimes I can close a deal, but keep talking. And so I'm very conscious of that, and I've created systems to help me monitor that. And even my wife says I've gotten better. How do you illustrate your sense of humor? As a self-starter, what stories can you tell about that? Desires and success. Okay, now you're going to get a lot of questions about, tell me about this. Tell me who you are. These are all where you can run, especially tell me a little bit about yourself. You can use a story in that 60 to 90 seconds there. That shows you that stories don't have to be long to be effective. Now, let's talk about connecting your stories to the key categories of the job. You've already aligned them with your signature strengths. Now let's talk about how we take those stories and align them with the key categories of the job. Every job has 5 to 6 or 7 categories, and you get that from the job search summary or from the recruiter. Then you take a core and categorical workbook and start planning what stories you're going to use. So, operations. This is, typically you're always going to get an operations question in an interview if you're a director or vice president. And so you want to, if you've had a great success in operation, you want to have maybe a quick story that you can tell how you achieve that success. In financial management, in a lot of companies now are looking at days in cash on hand, and or reducing overhead, or improving productivity. If you have stories that you can illustrate great accomplishments, that's great. That's wonderful. Human resources. Did you have a turnover problem? Were you able to alleviate the turnover? What was the financial gain to the organization by your efforts? How are you going to describe what you did? Put that in a story and use the structure of one of the stories that you've selected. Governance. This is either reporting to a board or reporting to your administrative person in the organization. And finally, marketing and service and revenue. How did you build revenue? How did you create the better bottom line? And so you want to talk about building a story. Michael Lewis, an author who wrote the book Moneyball, The Big Short, Boomerang, he gets fascinated with a subject. Then he finds people to tell the story. Nobody would have bought a book about sabermetrics, but everybody loved the book called the Moneyball, where he took Billy Beane, became friends with him. He lived in Berkeley. Billy Beane was across the bay in Oakland, and they were one of the first teams to use sabermetrics, how to pick players to put together a team, not based on their star power or their income, but what they do at bat, how many times they get on base. If they're a pitcher, what's their strikeout rate? What's their walk rate? They don't have to have conventional styles. They don't have to be in the top 10. But if you can get 3 or 4 great innings out of a pitcher and that you can get for a lower cost, that's how they built the Oakland A's, and they set one of the consecutive win records in the season featured in the movie. And it was the movie took some liberal sort of as movies do to tell stories. But Michael Lewis's book basically talked about sabermetrics and how it worked, but he did it through using characters. And that's basically what good storytelling is all about. It's really important once you get your stories to perfect your stories, okay? You're not ever going to be okay, I've got it, I've learned it, I can use the same story over and again and again. No, it's not a one and done process. Great storytellers constantly tweak to add impact, to enhance emotional response. Great speakers are the same way. They don't have a great PowerPoint or a keynote and then don't worry about it. I know speakers that do the same speech. They're on the 30th or 40th keynote with the same speech. And they're always practicing. They're always rehearsing. They're always thinking about their timing. They're always tweaking it to make it relevant for their audience, which you have to do in your storytelling. And those are the speakers that get paid the big bucks, and they deserve the big bucks because they work hard. Some people think, speaking is you have somebody write a speech for us, you learn it, and then you go out and make $50,000 or $100,000. No, to be a good speaker, like being a good storyteller, it's not a hard proposition. It's not a difficult construct, but it takes a lot of work. So it's simple but not easy. Hey, I hope you'll join us tomorrow afternoon, as I mentioned earlier, for our office hours at 4 p.m. Wednesday. And we're putting together a really good, helpful, I hope it's going to be a helpful live coaching session. It'll be on Facebook at johngself.com, the Facebook page, my LinkedIn page, and YouTube at guidingyourcareer, johngself.com. So I hope this has been helpful. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow afternoon on office hours. Remember, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box, and we'll be happy to respond. Cheers, everybody, and thank you for watching.